I appreciate the gesture, Mr. Ferrante, but I don't drink while working.
The club pulsed with whispered deals and expensive perfume, but Nico Ferrante noticed none of it. His eyes tracked the American bartender who'd turned down his champagne 3 nights running, the only woman in Milan who looked at him like he was simply a man. Something cracked open in his chest, ancient and terrifying. She wiped down the bar with steady hands, and he realized with absolute clarity that his carefully controlled world had just shifted on its axis. Today, we learn that genuine love isn't about power or possession. It's about seeing someone's worth when the whole world tries to convince you otherwise. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is choose someone who makes you vulnerable. And remember, genuine connection happens when we stop performing and start being honest about who we really are. Kindly like, subscribe, and share to people who need it. The rejection came smoothly, professionally. I appreciate the gesture, Mr. Ferrante, but I don't drink while working. Ivy Monroe set the champagne flute back on the polished bar without meeting his eyes. Nico studied her with the patience of a man who'd built an empire on reading people. 20 years of negotiations, hostile takeovers, and carefully orchestrated power plays hadn't prepared him for a 22-year-old bartender, treating him like any other customer. "It's Nico," he said quietly. "I know who you are." She moved to serve another customer, her movements efficient and unbothered. He should have walked away. The club belonged to him. Everything in it answered to his word. Women approached his table nightly with offers that ranged from business to pleasure, and he'd perfected the art of polite dismissal. But Ivy Monroe didn't approach. She worked her shift, laughed with regulars, and never once glanced at his corner table. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Later that evening, one of his associates leaned close. The American girl, she doesn't know. She knows. Nico watched Ivy navigate the crowded bar, her curvy figure moving with unconscious grace. She doesn't care. Want me to explain the situation? No. The word came sharp enough to end the conversation. He'd explain nothing. If Ivy chose to see him as simply another wealthy patron, perhaps that said more about his appeal than his reputation. The thought unsettled him. The next morning, Nico arrived at his office before dawn. The skyline of Milan spread before him, a city he'd shaped through strategy and ruthless efficiency. His assistant, Paolo, entered with coffee and the day's briefing. The shipment cleared customs. Rossi's asking for a meeting, and there's a situation with the club. Nico glanced up. What situation? One of the bartenders gave notice, the American. His hand stilled on the coffee cup. Why? Didn't say. Just 2 weeks' notice, professional and clean. Nico dismissed Paolo with a gesture, his mind already working. Ivy had been at the club for 3 months, arrived from New York with impeccable references and a work ethic that impressed even his hardest managers. She showed up early, stayed late, and treated every customer with the same warm professionalism. Except him. With him, she maintained a careful distance that felt deliberate. He made a decision that surprised himself. That evening, Nico didn't take his usual table. Instead, he positioned himself at the far end of the bar, where the lighting was softer and the crowd thinner. Ivy noticed immediately. Her hands hesitated for half a second before she approached. "What can I get you?" "Your time," Nico said simply. 5 minutes when your shift ends." "I don't think that's appropriate, Mr. Ferrante. It's about your resignation." Something flickered in her dark eyes. Surprise, maybe wariness. "There's nothing to discuss. I gave proper notice." "Humor me." He kept his voice gentle, non-threatening. 5 minutes. In my office upstairs, the door stays open." She considered him with an intelligence that most people hid behind flattery. Finally, she nodded once. 5 minutes. Ivy appeared at his office door exactly 15 minutes after her shift ended. She'd changed from her work uniform into jeans and a sweater that somehow made her look younger and more guarded. "You wanted to talk?" She stayed in the doorway, one hand on the frame. Nico gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please." She sat, but her posture remained defensive, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. "Why are you leaving?" he asked. "Personal reasons." "That's not an answer." "It's the one I'm giving you." Her chin lifted slightly. "I've been professional. I've completed my duties. I'm not required to explain my life choices to my employer." She was right, of course. But that didn't stop the frustration building in his chest. "Have you been uncomfortable here? Unsafe?" "No." "Has someone bothered you?" "No." "Then help me understand." Nico leaned forward, abandoning the formal distance he usually maintained. "You're good at this work. The customers like you. The staff respects you. Why leave?" Ivy studied him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quieter but no less firm. "Because I don't belong in your world, Mr. Ferrante, and staying longer will only make it harder to remember that." The admission landed between them like a confession. The next morning, Nico found himself doing something he hadn't done in 20 years. He questioned his own judgment. His world operated on clear rules: power, loyalty, results. Emotions were weaknesses to exploit in others, never indulge in himself. He'd built everything on that foundation. But Ivy's words circled in his mind with uncomfortable persistence. She saw the distance between them, recognized it as unbridgeable. The smart move would be letting her go. Accept her resignation, pay her well, forget she existed. Instead, he called Paolo. "The American, bartender, I need her employment extended." She gave notice. "Offer her double the salary, triple if necessary." Paolo's silence was eloquent. "Sir, that's highly unusual." "I'm aware. May I ask why?" Nico looked out at Milan's morning light. "Because I'm asking you to do it." Ivy's response came through official channels, a polite email declining the offer. Nico read it 3 times, each word a small rejection that felt disproportionately significant. He'd faced down hostile takeovers, navigated wars between families, survived assassination attempts. None of it had prepared him for a 22-year-old woman saying no with such quiet finality. That evening, he returned to the club, not to his usual table, but to the bar itself. Ivy's expression when she saw him could only be described as resigned. "What can I get you, Mr. Ferrante?" "Why won't you take the offer?" "Because money isn't why I'm leaving." She began mixing a drink for another customer with practiced efficiency. "And throwing more of it at me won't change my mind." "Then what will?" She looked at him directly for the first time since she'd started working there. Her eyes held something that looked like sadness. "Nothing. Some things just aren't meant to be." A few days later, Ivy's last shift arrived. Nico watched from his office window as the club filled with Friday night regulars. He'd stayed away from the bar all week, giving her the space she'd implicitly requested. But tonight was different. He found himself downstairs as midnight approached, navigating through the crowd with the kind of purpose that made people step aside instinctively. Ivy was laughing at something a customer said, her whole face lighting up with genuine warmth. The sight did something strange to his chest. She noticed him approaching. The laughter faded into professional courtesy. "Last call for you, Mr. Ferrante." "Dance with me." The words came out before he'd planned them. Ivy blinked. "I'm working." "Not for much longer." Nico extended his hand, aware that half the club was watching. "One dance. Then I'll let you go." She hesitated long enough that he thought she'd refuse. Then slowly, carefully, she placed her hand in his. The contact sent electricity up his arm. The club had a small dance floor that most patrons ignored in favor of private booths and business conversations. But a few couples swayed to the live jazz quartet, and Nico led Ivy into their midst. She fit against him perfectly, her head reaching his shoulder, her curves pressing close in a way that felt both innocent and devastating. "You don't have to do this," she murmured. "I know." His hand settled at the small of her back, steady and warm. "I want to." They moved together in silence for several heartbeats. Nico breathed in the scent of her hair, something floral and simple that shouldn't have affected him so profoundly. "Why me?" Ivy asked finally. "Every woman in this club would say yes to you. Why chase the one who keeps saying no?" "Because you see me." The truth came easier than expected. "Not my reputation. Not my money. Just me." Her breath hitched slightly. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "Then give me time to know you better." "I can't." Pain threaded through her voice. "You're 60 years old. I'm 22. You own half of Milan. I mix drinks for tips. This doesn't work in any version of reality. Age is just numbers. Money is just paper." Nico pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "What we have here, this connection, it's rare. Don't throw it away because it doesn't fit some expected pattern." Ivy's eyes glistened. "You say that now, but eventually you'll see me the way everyone else does. Young, naive, a phase. Never." The word came out fierce enough to make her flinch. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." The song ended. Ivy stepped back, putting careful distance between them. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Ferrante." Her voice was formal again, walls rebuilt. "I hope you have a good evening." She walked away before he could respond, disappearing into the back hallway where employees kept their belongings. Nico stood on the dance floor, surrounded by Milan's elite, feeling more alone than he had in decades. By the end of the week, Ivy was gone. Nico threw himself into work with single-minded intensity. Meetings, negotiations, strategic planning. Anything to avoid the strange emptiness that had taken up residence in his chest. Paolo noticed, of course. "The Rossi contract needs your signature." Nico signed without reading it. "The quarterly reports are ready for review. Email them. And there's a situation with the shipment from—" "Handle it!" Nico's voice came out sharper than intended. "That's what I pay you for." Paolo set down the papers and studied his employer with the familiarity of 2 decades together. "With respect, sir, you're not yourself." "I'm fine. You signed a contract without reading it. You've never done that. Not once in 20 years. Nico rubbed his face, suddenly exhausted. "What's your point?" "My point is that the American bartender affected you more than you're admitting." Paolo spoke carefully. "And hiding from it won't make it go away." That evening, Nico found himself at the club again, not in his office, not at his table, but standing at the bar where Ivy used to work. The new bartender was efficient, but unremarkable. The drinks were fine. The service was professional. Everything was exactly as it should be, except it felt wrong. One of his regulars, a banker named Vittorio, appeared at his elbow. "Looking for someone, Nico?" "No." The American girl was special, wasn't she? Vittorio signaled for another drink. "I noticed the way you watched her." Nico's jaw tightened. "You should focus on your own business." "I am." Vittorio's smile turned calculating. "I actually ran into her yesterday at that cafe near the Duomo. She's working there now, waitressing, I think." The information landed with unexpected impact. "Is that so?" "Seemed a shame. A girl like that, working for tips." Vittorio accepted his drink. "I offered to help her find better employment. She declined, but I'm persistent." Something dark and possessive unfurled in Nico's chest. "Stay away from her." Vittorio raised his eyebrows. Excuse me? Ivy Monroe is under my protection. The words came out calm but absolute. Anyone who bothers her answers to me. I didn't realize you'd claimed her. Now you do. Vittorio backed off immediately, reading the danger in Nico's tone. The next morning, Nico stood outside a small cafe near the Duomo, feeling ridiculous and determined in equal measure. He'd sent men to confirm Vittorio's information. Ivy did work here, morning shifts, serving coffee and pastries to tourists and locals. Through the window, he watched her navigate between tables with the same grace she'd shown at the club. She wore a simple black apron and her hair pulled back, looking impossibly young and unbearably beautiful. Nico pushed open the door. Ivy froze when she saw him. For a moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing surprise and something that might have been happiness. Then it snapped back into place. "Table for one," she asked politely. "Table for two." Nico gestured to a quiet corner. "When you have a break." "I'm working." "I'll wait." Her eyes narrowed. "Mr. Ferrante." "Nico." He moved to the corner table and sat down. "I'm a paying customer. I'd like an espresso and a cornetto, please." Ivy brought his order with visible reluctance. The espresso was perfect, the cornetto still warm from the oven. "Thank you," Nico said. She nodded and turned to leave. "I heard Vittorio approached you." That stopped her. "How did you?" She cut herself off, realization dawning. "You're having me followed. Protected." He kept his tone even. "There's a difference." "No, there isn't." Anger sparked in her eyes. "You have no right to interfere in my life. I have every right to protect what's mine. I'm not yours." The words came out loud enough to draw attention from other customers. Ivy's cheeks flushed. "Break room," she muttered. 5 minutes. The cafe's break room was barely larger than a closet. Storage shelves on one side, a small table, and 2 chairs on the other. Ivy shut the door and rounded on him. "You can't do this." "Do what?" Nico remained calm, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Make sure you're safe." "Control my life. I left your club specifically to get away from this, from you watching me, making decisions about me, acting like you have some claim on my existence." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm not one of your employees or your associates. You can't just decide I need protection and make it happen. Someone has to protect you." "From what? From men offering me job opportunities? From living my life? From men like Vittorio, who see a beautiful woman alone in a foreign city and think she's vulnerable?" Ivy's laugh was bitter. "And what are you doing right now, if not the exact same thing?" The accusation hit harder than it should have. Nico stood slowly, carefully keeping his movements non-threatening. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm seeing a beautiful woman alone in a foreign city. But I'm not thinking she's vulnerable. I'm thinking she's extraordinary. Brave enough to move across the world on her own. Strong enough to turn down money and power when it doesn't align with her values. Smart enough to see through all the pretense and recognize that none of it matters." Ivy's eyes glistened. "Then why can't you just let me go?" "Because I tried." The confession came raw and honest. "For 2 weeks I tried to forget you existed. I worked 20-hour days. I focused on everything else, and it changed nothing. You're still the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. That's not love. That's obsession. Maybe." Nico took a careful step closer. "But it's also the most real thing I've felt in 30 years. And I hope, you might feel something similar." "It doesn't matter what I feel." Tears spilled over. "We don't make sense. The world doesn't work like this. The world works however we decide it does." "You actually believe that?" wonder and frustration mixed in her voice. "You're so used to controlling everything that you think you can control this too." "I don't want to control you, Ivy. I want to know you. I want to wake up and hear about your dreams. I want to argue about books and music. I want to learn what makes you laugh and what makes you cry. I want all the mundane, ordinary moments that somehow feel extraordinary when I imagine them with you." Ivy pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. Nico fought the urge to pull her close. This had to be her choice. "I'm scared," she whispered finally. "Terrified, actually, because part of me wants exactly what you're describing, and that part is growing stronger every day, and I don't know how to handle it. So stop handling it alone." Nico extended his hand. "Let me help carry the fear." She looked at his hand like it represented everything dangerous and irresistible in the world. Then slowly, hesitantly, she placed her hand in his. The relief that crashed through Nico felt disproportionate to such a small gesture. But he knew what it meant. Ivy choosing to trust him, despite every logical reason not to. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay. We can try, but slowly. And honestly. No more following me or making decisions without asking." "Agreed." Nico raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt more intimate than anything he'd experienced. "Thank you." Later that evening, Nico took Ivy to dinner. Not to one of Milan's exclusive restaurants where cameras and gossip followed his every move. Instead, he chose a small trattoria in a quiet neighborhood. Family-owned, unremarkable from the outside, perfect for conversation. Ivy wore a simple dress that she'd clearly owned for years, and Nico thought she'd never looked more beautiful. They talked for 3 hours. She told him about growing up in Brooklyn, her mother's death when she was 16, working multiple jobs to save for Europe. He told her about inheriting his father's business at 25, the weight of expectations, the loneliness that came with power. "Do you regret it?" Ivy asked. "The life you built?" Nico considered the question seriously. "I regret the cost, the relationships I sacrificed, the normal experiences I missed. But I don't regret the work itself. It gave me purpose when I needed it. And now? Now I'm wondering if purpose might look different at 60 than it did at 25. Ivy smiled, and Nico felt it like sunlight after winter. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Nico adjusted his schedule to match Ivy's shifts. Morning coffee at the cafe where she worked, stolen lunch hours when their timing aligned, evening walks through Milan's quieter streets. He learned that she loved old movies and hated seafood, that she'd wanted to be a writer but lost confidence after her mother died, that she believed in second chances but struggled to accept them for herself. She learned that he collected first edition books and couldn't cook to save his life, that he'd been engaged once, 20 years ago, to a woman his family approved of, that he'd called it off 3 days before the wedding because he couldn't imagine spending his life with someone he didn't truly know. "Do you ever talk to her?" Ivy asked one evening as they walked along the Navigli. "No. She married someone else within the year, had 3 children. By all accounts, she's happy. Do you wonder what your life would have looked like if you'd gone through with it?" Nico stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Not once, because that version of my life doesn't include you." Ivy's breath caught. "We've known each other for 3 weeks. I've known important things in 3 seconds. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Time is relative when it comes to certainty." "That's terrifying." "I know." Nico smiled slightly. "But it's also true." By the end of their first month together, Nico knew he was falling in love. Not the cautious, measured interest he'd felt in previous relationships. This was something else entirely. Consuming and absolute and slightly unhinged. He wanted to give her everything. Not his money or his power, but his time, his attention, his complete devotion. It should have scared him. Instead, it felt like finally breathing after years underwater. The trouble started on a Tuesday. Ivy mentioned, almost casually, that one of the cafe's regular customers had asked her to dinner. A customer? Nico's hand tightened on his espresso cup. Yeah, he comes in every morning. Always very polite, always tips well. Ivy shrugged. I told him I was seeing someone, but he asked anyway. Said the offer stands if things don't work out. Every muscle in Nico's body went rigid. What's his name? Why? Ivy noticed his expression and frowned. Nico, it's not a big deal. I said no. His name, Ivy. She hesitated. I don't know. I don't ask customers their names unless they offer. Describe him. 30s, maybe. Dark hair, expensive suits, drives a black Mercedes. Nico's jaw clenched. That description fit half of Milan's business community, but it also fit several of his rivals. Did he ever ask about me? About your personal life? Not really. Just small talk about work and… Ivy stopped. You think he's gathering information? I think I need to know who's showing interest in you and why. That afternoon, Nico had the cafe watched. Paolo reported back within hours. His name is Alessandro Ricci, real estate developer, some connections to the Genovese family. Clean record. But he runs in circles that overlap with yours. Has he approached Ivy before today? Every morning for 2 weeks. Always friendly, always respectful. Nico's hands curled into fists. Continue surveillance. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he meets. Paolo hesitated. Sir, this might be exactly what it appears to be. A man interested in a beautiful woman. Or its leverage being positioned. Nico's voice went cold. Either way, I want to know. The situation escalated 3 days later. Ivy called Nico during his afternoon meetings, her voice tight with stress. Can you come to the cafe? Now? He was there in 15 minutes. Ivy stood behind the counter, pale but composed. Alessandro Ricci sat at a corner table, watching her with an expression that made Nico's vision narrow dangerously. What happened? Nico kept his voice low. He came in for his usual coffee. When I brought it over, he told me he knows who you are, who I am to you, and he said I should reconsider his dinner offer, because your world is dangerous for someone like me. Cold fury settled in Nico's chest. Stay here. He crossed the cafe in 5 strides and stopped at Alessandro's table. We need to talk. Outside. Alessandro smiled, all polite menace. I'm enjoying my coffee. Now. The word came out flat and absolute. The alley behind the cafe was narrow and shadowed. Nico waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. You have 10 seconds to explain why you're using my girlfriend to send me messages. Alessandro leaned against the wall, completely unafraid. Girlfriend? That's sweet. I didn't realize Nico Ferrante did relationships. You don't know anything about what I do. Answer the question. I'm not sending messages. I'm offering a beautiful woman an alternative to whatever arrangement you've trapped her in. She's not trapped. Isn't she? Alessandro's smile sharpened. Young American girl, no family, no connections. Shows up in Milan and ends up connected to the most powerful man in the city. That's quite a coincidence. It's none of your concern. Actually, it is. Because Ivy deserves better than being someone's midlife crisis. The insult landed precisely where Alessandro intended. Nico took a step forward, using his height and presence to crowd the younger man's space. Touch her again. Speak to her again. Even look at her from across the street. And I will destroy everything you've built. Your business, your reputation, your future. Do you understand me? Alessandro's composure cracked slightly. You're threatening me over a bartender? I'm promising you consequences for harassing what's mine. There's a difference. Nico returned to find Ivy watching through the cafe window, worry clear on her face. Is he gone? She asked. Yes. Did you hurt him? No. Nico pulled her gently away from the window, but I made my position clear. Ivy searched his face. What position is that? That you're under my protection, that anyone who bothers you answers to me, that I will level cities before I let someone hurt you. Instead of looking reassured, Ivy's expression turned troubled. That's exactly what he said would happen, that your world is violent and possessive and dangerous. He's trying to manipulate you. Is he? Because you just threatened to destroy a man's life over a dinner invitation. The accusation stung because it was partially true. He wasn't offering dinner. He was testing boundaries, seeing if he could use you as leverage against me. Or maybe he was just a guy who found me attractive and didn't know I was involved with someone. No. Nico's certainty was absolute. Men like Alessandro don't approach women without an agenda. Ivy stepped back, creating physical distance between them. Men like Alessandro, listen to yourself. You're so deep in this world that you can't imagine anyone doing anything for simple reasons. Because simple reasons don't exist in my reality. Exactly. Ivy's voice rose. Your reality. Not mine. I came to Milan to escape complications and drama and darkness. I wanted simple. I wanted safe. And instead, I'm standing in an alley while you threaten someone over me. The words hung between them like broken glass. Nico felt something shift in his chest. Fear, maybe, or the first cold touch of loss. What are you saying? Ivy's eyes filled with tears. I'm saying maybe Alessandro was right. Maybe I don't belong in your world, and maybe trying to force this to work is only going to hurt both of us. Ivy, I need space, time to think. She pulled off her apron with shaking hands. I'm going home. Please don't follow me. She walked away before he could respond, leaving Nico alone in the cafe with the taste of panic rising in his throat. The next 72 hours were the longest of Nico's life. He honored Ivy's request for space, though every instinct screamed at him to go to her apartment, to explain, to fix whatever he'd broken. Instead, he threw himself into work with mechanical precision. Paolo found him in his office at 3 a.m, staring at financial reports without seeing them. You should go home, sir. I'm fine here. You haven't slept in 2 days. I've gone longer. Nico didn't look up from papers he wasn't actually reading. Was there something you needed? Paolo set down a folder. Background on Alessandro Ricci. You were right to be suspicious. He's been meeting with Salvatore Russo twice a week for the past month. That got Nico's attention. Salvatore Russo ran one of Milan's smaller operations, ambitious, ruthless, and perpetually looking for ways to expand his influence. What's their connection? Real estate development is cover, but the properties Ricci acquires always seem to border your holdings. Russo's been trying to chip away at your territory for years. So, approaching Ivy was strategic. Likely. Though, Paolo hesitated. The surveillance suggests he might have developed genuine interest. He's been back to the cafe every day, even after your warning. Dark satisfaction mixed with anger in Nico's chest. Has he approached her? No. He orders coffee, sits at his usual table, watches her work, never speaks. That ends now. Pull our security detail tighter. I want someone on her 24/7. Sir, she asked for space. From me, not from protection. Nico's voice went hard. Russo doesn't play fair. If he thinks Ivy's important to me, she becomes a target. Across the city, Ivy sat in her tiny apartment trying to convince herself she'd made the right choice. Space, distance, logic. The problem was that logic felt hollow when she missed Nico so badly her chest ached. She'd replayed the cafe confrontation 100 times, analyzing every word, every expression. Nico's possessiveness had scared her, but so had her own response to it. Part of her had felt protected, claimed, wanted in a way that went beyond simple attraction. And that terrified her more than Nico's threats ever could. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Alessandro Ricci. Just checking in. The offer still stands if you want to talk. No pressure. Ivy stared at the text, unease creeping up her spine. She'd never given Alessandro her number. The next morning, Ivy returned to work, determined to establish normalcy. The cafe was busy with the usual breakfast rush. She moved through her shift on autopilot, serving coffee and pastries, while her mind replayed the past week on an endless loop. Alessandro appeared at his regular time, ordering his usual espresso. "Thank you for not running me off," he said with a charming smile. "I was worried Ferrante might have you convinced I'm the enemy. How did you get my phone number?" The question came out sharper than intended. Alessandro's smile faltered. "I asked your coworker, Maria, I think, said I wanted to invite you to a gallery opening." That could be true. Maria was friendly and trusting, exactly the type to share contact information if asked politely. But Ivy's instincts, the same ones that had kept her safe in New York, were screaming that something was wrong. "Please delete it," she said firmly. "I'm not interested in gallery openings, or dinner, or anything else. I appreciate your kindness, but I need you to respect my boundaries." Alessandro's expression went cold for just a fraction of a second. Then the charming mask returned. "Of course. My apologies for overstepping." He left the cafe without finishing his coffee. That evening, Ivy walked home through Milan's twilight streets, hyper-aware of every shadow and sound. She told herself she was being paranoid. Alessandro had been polite, professional, nothing overtly threatening, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Halfway to her apartment, Ivy made a decision that surprised herself. She pulled out her phone and called Nico. He answered on the first ring. "Ivy." The relief in his voice made her throat tight. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. "Face to face." "Where are you?" "Walking home from work, via della Spiga." "Stay where you are. I'm sending a car." "Nico, please, Ivy. Just this once, don't argue with me about your safety." Something in his tone made her agree. The black sedan arrived within 5 minutes. The driver was one of Nico's regular men, professional, quiet, respectful. He opened the door without comment, and Ivy slid into leather seats that still carried Nico's cologne. The drive to Nico's penthouse took 15 minutes through evening traffic. Ivy had never been to his home before. Their relationship had existed in neutral spaces, cafes, restaurants, public parks. Entering, his private world felt significant in ways she couldn't fully articulate. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Milan's skyline, modern furniture that somehow felt warm rather than cold, bookshelves filled with first editions he'd mentioned collecting. Nico stood by the windows, his back to the door. He turned when he heard her enter, and the naked relief on his face nearly undid her. "Thank you for coming." His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it properly in days. "You look terrible," Ivy said softly. "I haven't slept much. Because of me. Because of my own stupidity." Nico moved closer, but maintained careful distance. "I overreacted at the cafe. Let my protective instincts override common sense. I scared you, and I'm sorry." Ivy set down her bag. "You weren't entirely wrong. Alessandro. There's something off about him. He had my phone number and I never gave it to him." Nico's expression went dangerously neutral. "Did he threaten you?" "No, nothing like that. But he's too interested, too persistent. Like this is about more than just attraction." "Because it is." Nico gestured to the sofa. "Sit. I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." Nico explained everything. Alessandro's connection to Russo, the strategic timing of his interest in Ivy, the likelihood that she was being used as leverage. Ivy listened in growing horror. So this entire time he was just using me? To get to you? Yes. And you knew this 3 days ago. I suspected. Paolo confirmed it yesterday. Anger sparked in Ivy's chest. And you didn't think to tell me? You asked for space. I was trying to respect that while still keeping you safe. By having me followed. It wasn't a question. Nico didn't deny it. Yes. For how long? Since you left the club. The admission landed like a physical blow. Ivy stood abruptly, needing movement to process the betrayal. You've been watching me for over a month, following me, making decisions about my safety without my knowledge or consent. I was protecting you. You were controlling me. Ivy's voice rose. Just like Alessandro said you would. Just like everyone probably says about Nico Ferrante. He's possessive, obsessive, dangerous. I would never hurt you. You already have. Tears spilled over. By lying. By deciding what I need without asking me. By treating me like something to protect, rather than someone to trust. Nico flinched like she'd struck him. You're right. I should have told you. I should have asked instead of assuming. But Ivy, you have to understand. People like Russo don't follow rules. They exploit weaknesses. And you, I'm your weakness. The words came out hollow. That's what you're saying. That being with you makes me a target. Yes. The honesty was brutal and necessary. Ivy walked to the windows, staring out at Milan's lights without really seeing them. I came here tonight because I missed you. Because 3 days felt like 3 years. Because even knowing we don't make sense, even understanding all the logical reasons this won't work, I still want it. Want you. And that's terrifying. Nico moved to stand beside her, close enough that she felt his warmth, but still maintaining the distance she'd requested. I missed you too, he said quietly. Every minute. Every breath. I kept thinking about what you said, that maybe forcing this to work would only hurt us. And I realized you might be right. But I also realized I don't care. Ivy looked at him. I don't care if it's logical, Nico continued. I don't care about age differences or power imbalances or what other people think. I care about you. About mornings where I get to hear your laugh. About nights where we argue about books. About every small, ordinary moment that feels extraordinary because you're in it. That's not enough. Ivy's voice broke. Feelings aren't enough when your world brings danger. When men like Alessandro can use me to hurt you. When your first instinct is always to protect and control instead of trust and communicate. Then teach me. Nico turned to face her fully. Teach me how to be in a relationship instead of a power structure. Teach me to trust instead of protect. I'll fail sometimes, probably often, but I'll keep trying. Because losing you is worse than any failure. Ivy wanted to say yes, wanted to fall into his arms and pretend love could conquer every obstacle. But her mother's voice echoed in her mind, the lessons taught through bitter experience. Don't lose yourself for a man. Don't let love make you small. Don't accept less than you deserve. I need promises, she said finally. Real ones. No more having me followed without my knowledge. No more making decisions about my safety without consulting me. No more treating me like I'm fragile instead of capable. Agreed. And when your instinct is to protect and control, you need to stop and ask yourself if I actually need saving, or if you're just scared of losing me. That's harder, but I'll try. Trying isn't enough, Nico. I need you to succeed. Because the next time you override my autonomy, the next time you make choices for me instead of with me, I walk away. permanently. The ultimatum hung between them. Nico could have argued, could have pointed out that his world didn't allow for democratic decision-making, could have insisted that his experience and resources meant he knew better. Instead, he nodded slowly. I understand, and I agree to your terms. Relief and hope warred in Ivy's chest. Okay, then we can try again. But slowly, with actual communication. Slowly, Nico agreed. Then, tentatively, can I hold you? I've been wanting to for 3 days. Ivy stepped into his arms, and something in her chest finally relaxed. They fit together perfectly. Her head on his shoulder, his arms around her waist, both of them, breathing in sync for the first time since the cafe confrontation. I'm still angry with you, Ivy murmured against his shirt. I know. And I meant what I said. One more betrayal, and I'm gone. I know. Okay, good. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Now tell me the truth. How dangerous is Russo? They talked for hours. Nico explained the complex web of Milan's power structures, the legitimate businesses that served as fronts, the politicians on various payrolls, the unspoken rules that governed conflicts. Russo is ambitious, but not stupid, Nico said. He won't move against you directly. Too obvious. But he'll apply pressure through other means. Alessandro was probably the first test, seeing if you could be swayed or intimidated. What happens now? Now, I make it clear that you're untouchable, that anyone who bothers you answers to me personally. Ivy frowned. Isn't that exactly the possessive behavior we just agreed you'd stop? There's a difference between controlling your choices and protecting your physical safety. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're still making unilateral decisions. Nico exhaled slowly. What would you suggest? Talk to me. Explain the threat. Ask me what I'm comfortable with. Let me help make decisions about my own safety. He struggled for words. That's not how this works. My world doesn't allow for committee decisions when lives are at stake. Then maybe I can't be in your world. Ivy's voice was gentle but firm, because I won't be a passive participant in my own life. Not for anyone. Not even for you. The conversation continued into the night. They argued, compromised, argued again. Slowly, painfully, they began establishing rules that acknowledged both Nico's legitimate security concerns and Ivy's need for autonomy. Security detail, but Ivy would know who and when. Background checks on people in her life, but with her awareness and consent. Safety protocols for emergencies, but developed together. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. By the time dawn broke over Milan, they'd established something that felt like foundation, fragile but real. Later that morning, Nico made a series of phone calls. The first was to Paolo. Set up a meeting with Russo. Today, if possible. Sir, is that wise? Probably not. Do it anyway. The second call went to his security team. I want full protection detail on Ivy Monroe, but I want it visible. She knows about it, and she's authorized to dismiss them if she's uncomfortable. Her autonomy takes priority over my paranoia. Understood? The third call went to Alessandro Ricci's office. This is Nico Ferrante. I'm calling to inform you that any further contact with Ivy Monroe will be considered a hostile act against me personally. Terminate your interest immediately, or face consequences that will extend far beyond business rivalries. This is your only warning. He hung up before Alessandro could respond. Ivy returned to work that afternoon with new awareness of her surroundings. True to Nico's word, the security detail was visible. A professionally dressed man reading a newspaper 2 tables over. Close enough to intervene, but far enough to not intrude. It should have felt oppressive. Instead, it felt like Nico keeping his promise, protecting her while respecting her boundaries. The cafe shift passed uneventfully. Alessandro didn't appear. Neither did any other suspicious characters. As Ivy wiped down tables during the evening lull, her co-worker Maria approached. "That guy who's been watching you all day, he's with Ferrante, isn't he?" Ivy paused. "How did you know?" "Please. Half of Milan knows you're seeing him. The other half suspects." Maria grinned. "And before you panic, most people think it's romantic. Powerful man, beautiful woman, age gap love story. It's not a story. It's my life. I know. And for what it's worth, I think it's so brave. Dating someone like Ferrante means living with constant attention and pressure. Not many people could handle that." "I'm not sure I can," Ivy admitted. "But you're trying. That counts for something." That evening, Nico picked Ivy up from work in person rather than sending a car. He looked tired, but more relaxed than he had in days. "How was the meeting with Russo?" Ivy asked, as they drove through Milan's streets. "Enlightening. He denied targeting you, of course. But I made my position clear. Which was that you're under my protection, that any threat to you is a threat to me, and that I'm prepared to escalate conflicts beyond professional rivalries if necessary." Ivy studied his profile. "You threatened to start a war over me. I promised to finish one. There's a difference. Nico, I know what we agreed. I know I'm supposed to include you in decisions about your safety. But some things I won't compromise on." He glanced at her. "I won't apologize for being willing to burn my world down to keep you safe." Ivy's throat tightened. "That's terrifying and romantic in equal measure. Welcome to my life." They drove in comfortable silence for several minutes. Then Ivy spoke again. "Where are we going? This isn't the direction to my apartment. I have a surprise for you." Nico's expression softened. "Something that doesn't involve threats or power plays or danger. Just us." Nico pulled up to an art gallery in Milan's quieter district. "I know you mentioned wanting to see more of the city's culture," he said. "This gallery is hosting a private showing tonight. Contemporary Italian artists, mostly unknown. No crowds or cameras." Ivy's eyes lit up. "How did you arrange this?" "I know the owner. Called in a favor." He opened her door. "Come on. We have 2 hours before they open to the public." The gallery was small and intimate. Whitewashed walls, perfect lighting, art that ranged from abstract to hyper-realistic. They wandered through together, Ivy's hand in Nico's, discussing pieces and sharing reactions. It was normal and extraordinary at once, like any couple enjoying art together, except Nico's bodyguard waited outside, and half the paintings probably cost more than Ivy made in a year. This one. Ivy stopped in front of a large canvas depicting Milan's skyline at sunset. "It's beautiful." Nico studied it critically. "The perspective is interesting. The artist captured the way the light changes the building's colors. That's very technical. What do you feel when you look at it?" He considered the question seriously. "Home, but also loneliness. Like the city is beautiful but distant." "That's exactly it." Ivy squeezed his hand. "You see things, Nico, not just the surface. That's one of the things I love about you." The words slipped out naturally, without thought. They both froze. Ivy's breath caught. "I didn't mean, that is, I meant, don't." Nico turned to face her fully, his eyes intense. "Don't take it back. It's too soon. We've barely been together. I shouldn't have, Ivy." He cupped her face gently. "I love you too. I've loved you since you turned down my champagne and looked at me like I was just a man. I've loved you through every argument and every reconciliation. And I'll love you tomorrow and next week and next year." Tears spilled down Ivy's cheeks. "This is crazy." "I know. We've known each other 6 weeks." "I know. I'm 22 and you're 60, and nothing about this makes sense. I know. Nico smiled, wiping away her tears. And none of it changes how I feel. Ivy laughed through her tears. You're impossible. But I'm yours. She pulled him down and kissed him. Not the careful, tentative kisses they'd shared before, but something deeper and more certain. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Nico rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight, he whispered. Not for anything physical, just stay. Let me hold you. Let me wake up, knowing you're there. Ivy nodded, beyond words. They returned to Nico's penthouse as night fell over Milan. Nico gave Ivy one of his shirts to sleep in, soft cotton that smelled like him, and fell to her knees. They climbed into his massive bed together, both suddenly shy despite the intensity of their earlier confession. I've never done this before, Ivy admitted, curled against his side. Slept beside someone I love. It's intimate. More intimate than anything else, Nico agreed. His arm tightened around her. Thank you for trusting me with this. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the city sounds filtering through the windows. Nico? Ivy's voice was drowsy. Yes? Promise me something. Anything. Promise that no matter what happens, with Russo, with Alessandro, with your world trying to pull us apart, you'll talk to me. You'll let me in. You won't try to handle everything alone. Nico pressed a kiss to her hair. I promise. No more secrets, no more unilateral decisions. We're partners. Partners? Ivy repeated softly. Then, even quieter. I love you. I love you too. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, hearts beating in sync, both aware that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight belonged only to them. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. Ivy was closing the cafe on Thursday evening when 2 men in expensive suits entered just before locking time. We're closed, she said automatically. We're not here for coffee. The taller one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Salvatore Russo would like to speak with you. Just a conversation. Nothing threatening. Ivy's blood went cold. I have nothing to say to Salvatore Russo. He thought you might say that. The second man stepped closer, which is why he asked us to extend a personal invitation. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, at his office. He's willing to offer you something Ferrante can't. Freedom from this complicated situation you found yourself in. I'm not interested. Think about it. The first man laid a business card on the counter. Russo is a reasonable man. He's offering you a way out before things get more complicated, before people you care about get hurt. The implied threat was clear. They left before Ivy could respond. Ivy's hands shook as she locked up the cafe. The security detail Nico had assigned, a different man today, older and more weathered, appeared at her elbow. Miss Monroe, are you all right? Those men who just left, did you get their identities? Already calling it in. He spoke quietly into his phone, then back to Ivy. Mr. Ferrante will want to know about this immediately. I'm aware. Ivy pulled out her own phone. I'll tell him myself. Nico arrived at Ivy's apartment 20 minutes later, tension evident in every line of his body. Are you hurt? Were his first words. No. They were professional. Polite even? Ivy handed him the business card. But the message was clear. Meet with Russo or face consequences. Nico's jaw clenched as he read the card. You're not going. I know. I'll handle this. Nico, this is exactly the kind of situation where you let me handle it. His voice was hard. The warm man from 3 nights ago replaced by the ruthless businessman who'd built an empire. Russo crossed a line. He approached you directly. That requires a response. What kind of response? The kind that makes it clear you're completely off limits. Ivy grabbed his arm. We talked about this, about making decisions together. That was before he threatened you in your workplace. Nico's eyes were ice. There's no negotiation here, no compromise. He made this personal. It was always personal. I've been personal since the moment you decided I was worth chasing across Milan. Ivy's voice rose. But you can't just shut me out every time things get dangerous. That's not partnership. That's protection. And I told you I won't accept that. The argument that followed was their first real fight. Nico insisted that Ivy didn't understand the stakes, that Russo playing for keeps, that her safety required his unilateral action. Ivy countered that treating her like a child who couldn't handle adult realities was exactly the behavior she'd warned him about. They went in circles for an hour, neither willing to bend. Finally, Ivy said the words that stopped them both. If you go after Russo without including me in the decision, without even explaining your plan, then we're done. I mean it, Nico. I'll walk away and never look back. The ultimatum landed like a bomb. Nico stared at her, disbelief and hurt warring on his face. You'd leave me over this? I'd leave you over the principle, over you choosing to exclude me from my own life. Ivy's voice was steady despite her shaking hands. I told you from the beginning, I won't be controlled, not even by someone I love, especially not by someone I love. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Nico exhaled slowly and sat down on her worn sofa. You're right. The admission came quietly. I'm doing exactly what you warned me about, reverting to old patterns because I'm scared. Ivy sat beside him, some of the anger draining away. Scared of what? Of Russo hurting you, of my world destroying the best thing that's ever happened to me, of failing to protect you because I tried to respect your autonomy. He looked at her. I know that's not rational. I know you're capable and smart and strong, but fear isn't rational. So what do we do? Ivy asked. How do we navigate this when your instinct is always to protect and mine is always to participate? I don't know. Nico's honesty was painful, but I know I can't lose you. So I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Together. Ivy took his hand. Okay. Then let's start by talking through the situation logically. What does Russo actually want? They spent the next 2 hours analyzing the situation like a puzzle. Russo's endgame wasn't Ivy herself. It was using her as leverage against Nico, creating division, exploiting vulnerabilities, demonstrating that Nico's power had limits. So if I ignore the invitation, he escalates, Ivy reasoned. But if I go alone, I'm walking into a trap. Which is why you're not going at all. What if I went with you? Nico's expression turned considering. Russo wouldn't expect that. He's counting on me keeping you isolated, protected. Showing up together demonstrates unity. And calls his bluff about offering me freedom. If I'm there willingly, with you, his whole narrative falls apart. It's still risky. Everything about us is risky. Ivy squeezed his hand. But we're doing it anyway. They finalized the plan together. Ivy would attend the meeting with Nico, accompanied by his security detail. They'd present a united front, make it clear that Ivy wasn't a pawn to be manipulated, and force Russo to either make a real offer or reveal his true intentions. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. That night, Ivy stayed at Nico's penthouse again. They lay in bed talking about everything except tomorrow's meeting. Childhood memories, favorite books, dreams for the future. When this is over, Nico said softly, when Russo backs off and things settle down, I want to take you somewhere. Not Milan, not Italy. Somewhere that's just ours. Where? Wherever you want. Paris, New York, Tokyo. A small island no one's ever heard of. You choose. Ivy smiled against his chest. I'd like that. We could disappear for a week. No business, no threats, no complications. Just us. You say that like it's possible. Can Nico Ferrante actually disappear for a week? For you? Nico pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'd disappear for a lifetime. The meeting with Russo was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Nico and Ivy arrived at 1:55, flanked by Paolo and 2 other security personnel. Russo's office occupied the top floor of a modern building in Milan's financial district, all glass and steel, designed to intimidate. Salvatore Russo himself was younger than Ivy expected, maybe 45, with the kind of polished charm that probably worked well in business negotiations. His surprise at seeing Ivy arrive with Nico was poorly concealed. Mr. Ferrante, Miss Monroe, this is unexpected. Is it? Nico's voice was deceptively mild. You invited my girlfriend to a meeting. Naturally, I escorted her. I was hoping to speak with Miss Monroe privately. That's not happening. Ivy spoke before Nico could. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of both of us. Russo's smile tightened. Very well. Please, sit. The office was designed to impress. Panoramic windows, expensive art, furniture that cost more than most cars. Russo settled behind his desk, and Ivy immediately understood the power play. He sat elevated, in control, while they sat lower as supplicants. Nico noticed too. Instead of sitting, he remained standing, positioning himself slightly in front of Ivy in a protective stance that managed to be supportive rather than controlling. You're here, Russo began, because I believe Miss Monroe deserves to understand the full scope of her relationship with you, Nico. The risks, the dangers, the reality that being connected to you makes her a target for people like me. I'm aware of the risks, Ivy said calmly. Nico's been very honest about his world. Has he? Russo leaned forward. Has he told you about the families he's destroyed? The businesses he's crushed? The people who've disappeared when they became inconvenient? I've told her everything relevant, Nico cut in, and she chose to stay anyway. This conversation is pointless. Is it? Because I'm offering Miss Monroe something you can't. A clean exit. A substantial sum of money. A new identity if she wants it. And freedom from the violent world you've dragged her into. The offer hung in the air. Ivy stood slowly, drawing both men's attention. Mr. Russo, I appreciate your concern for my well-being, but I don't need rescuing. I'm not a damsel, and this isn't a fairy tale. I'm a grown woman who made an informed choice to be with Nico, and no amount of money or fear-mongering is going to change that. Russo's expression hardened. You're very confident for someone so young, but confidence won't protect you when things get ugly. Neither will running away. Ivy met his gaze steadily. I understand what you're really doing here. You're trying to create division between Nico and me. Make me doubt him. Make him doubt my commitment. But it won't work. We're stronger than you think. Russo stood abruptly, his polite mask slipping. You have no idea what you're involved in. The wars, the bloodshed, the compromises Ferrante's made to stay on top. You think love will protect you from that reality? No, Ivy said quietly. I think honesty will. Communication. Trust. All the things you clearly don't understand. This meeting is over, Nico said coldly. And Russo? If you or anyone connected to you approaches Ivy again, if you so much as breathe in her direction, I will consider it an act of war. And unlike you, I don't make empty threats. They left Russo's office with heads high and hands clasped. In the car, Ivy finally let herself shake. That was terrifying, she admitted. You were incredible. Nico pulled her close. The way you stood up to him, the way you defended us. Ivy, you were amazing. I meant what I said. About choosing this. Choosing you. Even knowing the risks. I know. And that terrifies me more than anything Russo could do. Ivy looked up at him. Why? Because it means you trust me not to let you down. and I'm so afraid I will." "Then don't." She cupped his face. "Don't shut me out. Don't make decisions alone. Don't try to protect me from the truth. Just be honest. Always. That's all I need." Nico kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of promise. The week following the Russo meeting brought unexpected peace. No threats materialized, no mysterious phone calls or suspicious encounters. Alessandro Ricci disappeared entirely from the cafe, and even Russo seemed to have backed off. Nico remained cautious, but Ivy could feel him beginning to relax. They fell into a routine that felt almost normal. Morning coffee at the cafe where Ivy worked, stolen lunch hours when their schedules aligned, evenings spent at Nico's penthouse, talking about everything and nothing. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Ivy met Nico's sister for the first time. "Gabriella is protective," Nico warned, as they waited for her to arrive. "She raised me after our parents died. She's going to have opinions about us. Should I be worried?" "Only if you care about the approval of a 75-year-old Italian woman with no filter and strong opinions about everything." Ivy laughed nervously. "So yes, I should be terrified." The doorbell rang before Nico could respond. Gabriella Ferrante was smaller than Ivy expected, barely 5 feet tall, white-haired, dressed in elegant black with pearls. But her eyes were sharp and assessing as they swept over Ivy from head to toe. "So you're the American bartender who's captured my brother's heart." Her English was perfect, her tone neutral. "I prefer to think we captured each other's hearts," Ivy said, extending her hand. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Gabriella. Just Gabriella." She ignored the hand and pulled Ivy into a brief hug that smelled like expensive perfume and old money. "Come. Sit. We have much to discuss." The evening that followed was unlike anything Ivy had experienced. Gabriella interrogated her with the precision of a lawyer and the warmth of a grandmother. She asked about Ivy's family, her education, her plans for the future. She questioned Ivy's intentions toward Nico with blunt directness that would have been offensive from anyone else. "You understand he's falling in love with you," Gabriella said over dinner. "Actually in love, for perhaps the first time in his life. That comes with responsibility." "I love him too," Ivy said quietly, "and I take that seriously." "Do you?" "Because loving my brother means accepting his world. The danger, the complexity, the reality that his enemies will see you as leverage. Are you prepared for that?" Ivy glanced at Nico, who watched the exchange with carefully neutral expression. "I'm learning to be," Ivy admitted. "It's not easy, but he's worth it." Gabriella studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "Good answer. The honest ones usually are." She turned to Nico. "You chose well, Fratello. She has spine." Nico's relief was palpable. "High praise coming from you. Don't let it go to your head." But Gabriella's expression softened as she looked between them. "It's good to see you happy. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how." After Gabriella left, Ivy and Nico stood on the penthouse balcony, looking out over Milan's nighttime skyline. "That went better than expected," Ivy said. "Gabriella likes you. That's significant." Nico pulled her close, his arms around her waist. "She doesn't like many people. She loves you. It's obvious in everything she says. She practically raised me. Our parents died when I was 25. Car accident, sudden and terrible. Gabriella stepped in, helped me navigate the business, kept me from making catastrophic mistakes." Ivy leaned back against him. "Tell me more about them." "Your parents." So he did. And for the first time since they'd met, Nico talked about his past without reservation. The good memories and the painful ones, the legacy he'd inherited, and the burden it represented. Ivy listened, absorbing every detail, understanding him better with each word. The 4. Trouble returned on a Tuesday morning. Ivy was opening the cafe when her phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a local area code. Hello. Miss Monroe, this is Detective Caruso with the Milan Police. I need you to come down to the station to answer some questions. Ivy's blood went cold. Questions about what? It's regarding your relationship with Nico Ferrante and some recent financial irregularities we're investigating. It's routine, nothing to worry about. But we do need to speak with you today. Okay. When? As soon as possible. I know where the police station is. Ivy's mind raced. I'll be there within the hour. She hung up and immediately called Nico. Don't go. Nico's voice was tight with tension. It's a trap. How do you know? Because the police don't call and ask nicely. They show up, or they send official summons. A polite phone call requesting you come in. That's someone trying to separate you from protection. But what if it's real? What if I ignore it and that makes things worse? Then we go together, with lawyers, through official channels. Nico was already moving. She could hear it in his voice. Where are you? At the cafe. Should I open? No. Lock the door, wait inside. I'm sending Paolo to get you, and I'll meet you at my lawyer's office. Don't talk to anyone until I get there. 2 hours later, Ivy sat in a sleek law office surrounded by men in expensive suits. Nico's lead attorney, Franco Benedetti, reviewed the supposed police request with clinical precision. It's fake, he said finally. The detective doesn't exist. The badge number is invalid, and the police department has no record of any investigation involving either of you. So, who called me? Ivy asked. That's what we're going to find out. Franco looked at Nico. But this is sophisticated. Whoever's behind it has access to official-looking credentials and knows enough about police procedure to sound convincing. Russo, Nico said flatly. Possibly. Or someone else who knows how to exploit vulnerabilities. Franco turned to Ivy. Miss Monroe, I need you to tell me everything about the call. Every word you can remember. The investigation revealed more unsettling details. The fake detective had known specific information about Ivy, her schedule, her workplace, even her phone number, which she'd changed twice since the Alessandro incident. Someone's conducting surveillance, Paolo reported. Professional grade. They knew exactly when to call for maximum impact. Nico's expression was murderous. Russo broke the truce. Or he's testing boundaries, Franco suggested, seeing how far he can push before you retaliate. Then he's about to find out. Ivy grabbed Nico's arm. What are you going to do? What I should have done weeks ago. End this permanently. How? Nico looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, Ivy saw something truly dangerous in his eyes. By removing Russo from the equation entirely. The argument that followed was their worst yet. Ivy insisted that escalating to violence would only create more problems. Nico countered that Russo had already escalated by targeting Ivy directly. You don't understand, Nico said, frustration evident. In my world, weakness is blood in the water. If I don't respond decisively, every rival will think they can use you against me. So your solution is what? Kill him? Start a war? If necessary. No. Ivy stood firm. I won't be the reason you destroy everything you've built. I won't let my presence in your life turn you into something you're not. You don't get to decide that. Actually, I do. Because if you go down this path, if you choose violence over strategy, I'm gone. Permanently. The ultimatum landed like a slap. Nico stared at her, disbelief and hurt warring on his face. You'd leave me for protecting you? I'd leave you for becoming a monster. Ivy's voice shook, but remained steady. There has to be another way. A solution that doesn't involve bloodshed. Name one. I don't know. But you're supposed to be this brilliant strategist, this master of negotiation. So figure it out. Find a way to neutralize Russo without destroying yourself in the process." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Franco cleared his throat. "There might be another option," he said carefully. "Less dramatic than warfare, but potentially more effective." Both Nico and Ivy turned to him. "Russo's operation depends on several key relationships: politicians, businessmen, international connections. If we could compromise those relationships, undermine his support structure, he'd be forced to retreat without a single shot fired." Nico's expression turned considering. "You're talking about destroying his credibility." "Exactly. Make his allies question their association. Reveal financial irregularities, ethical violations, anything that makes supporting him more costly than abandoning him. That takes time. Less than you'd think. I've already identified 3 major vulnerabilities in his network. Given 2 weeks, I could have him so isolated that approaching Miss Monroe again would be suicide for his remaining relationships." Ivy looked between them. "Is that legal?" "Mostly." Franco's smile was thin. "We'll be exposing actual violations, just strategically." Nico studied Ivy's face, clearly torn between his instinct for immediate action and her plea for a different path. 2 weeks, he said finally. Franco has 2 weeks to dismantle Russo's network. But if anything happens to Ivy in that time, if Russo makes one more move, I respond my way. It wasn't a perfect compromise, but it was something. "Okay," Ivy agreed. 2 weeks. The following days were tense but productive. Franco worked behind the scenes, gathering evidence and building cases. Paolo coordinated with contacts throughout Milan, collecting information and applying subtle pressure. Nico divided his time between managing his legitimate businesses and overseeing the operation against Russo. Ivy could see the strain on him, the constant vigilance, the worry, the effort of choosing strategy over instinct. But he kept his promise. No violence, no direct confrontation. Instead, they played a longer game. 3 of Russo's political connections have already distanced themselves, Franco reported during a strategy session. The evidence of financial impropriety was compelling. "Fabricated?" Ivy asked. "Enhanced. The violations were real, we just made them more visible." Franco didn't look remotely apologetic. 2 more weeks, and Russo will be toxic. No one will risk association. The breakthrough came on day 10. Paolo burst into Nico's office with news that changed everything. "Russo's making a move. Tonight, he's meeting with representatives from the Genovese family. He's trying to form an alliance, pool resources to come after you directly." Nico's expression went ice cold. "Where?" "The warehouse district. Midnight. He thinks it's secret. But we have someone inside the Genovese organization who's loyal to you." Then we interrupt the meeting. "Nico, no." Ivy stood up. "That's exactly what he wants. You showing up, starting a confrontation, giving him justification to escalate. If the Genovese alliance happens, everything Franco's done becomes irrelevant. Russo will have the backing to move against us openly." "So we expose the meeting," Ivy said. "We make it public. Show the Genovese family that Russo can't keep things quiet. Make them realize he's a liability." Nico paused. "That could work." "Better than work," Franco added. "The Genovese value discretion above everything. If their secret meeting becomes public knowledge, they'll cut Russo loose immediately to avoid association." They executed the plan with precision. Anonymous tips went to 3 different news outlets. Photographs of Russo entering the warehouse appeared on social media within minutes. By the time the meeting actually started, half of Milan's underground knew about it. The Genovese representatives left before any real discussion occurred. Russo was left alone in an abandoned warehouse, his alliance attempt dead before it began. The final blow came 2 days later. Franco released a comprehensive report detailing Russo's financial irregularities, ethical violations, and questionable business practices. It went to every newspaper, every regulatory agency, every business partner Russo had. Within 24 hours, Salvatore Russo was persona non grata in Milan's business community. His operation didn't collapse. That would take months. But it was effectively neutered. No one would risk association. No one would offer support. He was finished. Nico received the confirmation while having dinner with Ivy at a small restaurant they'd claimed as theirs. He read the message twice, then set down his phone with visible relief. It's over. Russo's done. Franco confirmed that his remaining associates are jumping ship. Ivy's smile was tremulous. So we're safe. As safe as we can be in this world. Nico reached across the table for her hand. Thank you. For what? For making me find a better way. For refusing to let me become the monster I was capable of being. You were never a monster. Just a man who loved fiercely and protected desperately. Ivy squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you. For choosing strategy over violence. For trusting Franco's plan, even when your instinct screamed otherwise. I trusted you. That's what made the difference. That night, they returned to Nico's penthouse and made love for the first time. It wasn't the frantic, desperate encounter Ivy had sometimes imagined. Instead, it was slow and tender and achingly intimate. Two people learning each other completely, without fear or urgency. Just profound connection. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Nico's massive bed, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. I've never felt this with anyone, Nico admitted quietly. This level of trust, of vulnerability. Neither have I. Ivy traced patterns on his chest. It's terrifying and wonderful. Marry me. The words came softly but clearly. Ivy went still. What? Nico propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with complete seriousness. Marry me. Not someday or eventually. Soon. As soon as we can arrange it. Nico, we've been together for 2 months. I know. And I've never been more certain of anything. He cupped her face. I love you, Ivy Monroe. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up beside you for the next 40 years. I want children if you want them, or just us if you don't. I want everything, and I want it with you. Tears spilled down Ivy's cheeks. This is crazy. I know. People will say you're, having a midlife crisis, that I'm too young, that we don't make sense. I know. And you don't care? Not even a little bit. Nico's smile was soft and certain. The only opinion that matters is yours. So what do you say, Ivy? Will you marry me? Ivy's heart hammered against her ribs. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was too fast, too intense, too risky. But her heart, her foolish, brave, hopeful heart, knew exactly what it wanted. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Nico kissed her then, and Ivy tasted joy and promise, and forever in that single moment. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at Gabriella's villa outside Milan. Only immediate family and closest friends attended. Paolo, Franco, a handful of Nico's most trusted associates, and Gabriella herself, who cried through the entire ceremony, despite insisting she never cried. Ivy wore a simple ivory dress that Gabriella had worn at her own wedding 60 years earlier. Nico wore a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of such profound happiness that several guests later admitted to tearing up. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but felt deeply personal. I promise to see you, Nico said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Not as something to protect or control, but as my equal partner. I promise to trust your strength even when my instinct is to shield you. I promise to choose us, always, over everything else. Ivy's hands shook as she spoke her own vows. I promise to stay, through the dangerous moments and the difficult decisions. I promise to speak my truth even when it's hard. I promise to love you, not despite your flaws and complications, but including them. All of you, always. When they kissed as husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in applause. The reception was intimate and joyful. They danced under fairy lights in Gabriella's garden. They laughed with friends. They cut a cake that Paolo had specially commissioned with both their favorite flavors. As the evening wound down, Gabriella pulled Ivy aside. You make him better, she said simply. Happier, yes, but also better. More human. More himself. He does the same for me, Ivy admitted. Good. Then you'll be all right. Gabriella squeezed her hand. Marriage to a Ferrante is never simple. But if you can survive what you've already faced together, you can survive anything. Nico and Ivy spent their wedding night at a private villa on Lake Como, a property Nico owned but rarely used. They made love again, this time as husband and wife, and the significance of that simple change felt profound. Afterward, they lay on the balcony under blankets, watching stars reflect on the lake's surface. I have something to tell you, Ivy said quietly. Nico tensed. Good or bad? I don't know yet. Maybe both. She took his hand. I'm pregnant. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Nico pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. How long have you known? About a week. I took 3 tests to be sure. Ivy's voice shook. I was going to tell you before the wedding, but everything was happening so fast, and I didn't want you to think I was pressuring you and… Ivy. Nico pulled back to look at her. This is the best news I've ever received in my life. Really? Because you're 60 years old, and I know you never planned on having children, and I never planned on you either. But here we are. He pressed his hand to her still flat stomach with wonder. A baby. Our baby. Tears of relief spilled down Ivy's face. You're happy? Beyond happy. Beyond anything I knew how to feel before you. They spent the next hour planning. Practical things like doctors and nurseries. Ridiculous things like potential names and personality predictions. I want to be a good father, Nico said eventually. But I have no idea how. My own father died before I could really know him as an adult. Then we'll figure it out together. Just like everything else. Together, Nico agreed. Then, more seriously, I'm going to step back from the business. Not entirely, but significantly. I want to be present for this child. For you. For our family. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. Because you and this baby, you're my legacy now, not the empire or the power or any of it. You. The pregnancy changed everything and nothing. Ivy still worked at the cafe through her first trimester, despite Nico's protests. She maintained her independence, her routines, her sense of self. But she also allowed herself to lean on Nico in ways she never had before, accepting his help with doctor's appointments, letting him fuss over her health, even tolerating the increased security detail he insisted on. It's not just you anymore, he'd said, when she complained about the constant presence of bodyguards. It's our child. Please, Ivy, let me do this. And because she understood, his fear, his need to protect what mattered most, she agreed. The first real scare came at 14 weeks. Ivy woke up bleeding, panic clawing at her throat. Nico was beside her in seconds, calling for the car, wrapping her in blankets, whispering promises that everything would be okay. The hospital visit was terrifying. Tests, ultrasounds, doctors speaking in calm voices that only amplified Ivy's fear. Nico held her hand through all of it, his presence the only thing keeping her from completely falling apart. Finally, the doctor smiled. The baby's fine, perfectly healthy. What you experienced was a subchorionic hemorrhage, frightening but not uncommon. With rest and careful monitoring, everything should proceed normally. The relief was overwhelming. Ivy sobbed against Nico's chest while he stroked her hair and murmured reassurances in Italian. That night, safe at home, they talked about the fear they'd both felt. "I've never been that scared," Nico admitted. "Even facing death threats or business collapses. Nothing compared to thinking we might lose this baby. Me either." Ivy pressed her hand to her stomach, reassured by the life still growing there. It made everything real in a way it wasn't before. "We should tell people. Family, friends. Make it official." Ivy nodded. "Gabriella first. She deserves to know she's going to be a great aunt." "She'll be impossible," Nico predicted with a smile. "Already planning nurseries and buying tiny clothes. I can't wait." Gabriella's reaction to the pregnancy news was everything they'd hoped for, and more. She cried, laughed, hugged them both fiercely, and immediately began making plans. A baby Ferrante. Finally. She pressed her hands to Ivy's stomach with wonder. "I have so much to teach you about raising children in this family." "I'm terrified," Ivy admitted. "Good. Fear means you understand the responsibility." Gabriella's expression softened. "But you'll be wonderful parents. I see how you love each other. That's the foundation everything else builds on." The months that followed were a strange blend of ordinary and extraordinary. Ivy's body changed, growing round with their child. Nico adapted his life completely, cutting business hours, delegating responsibilities, making space for doctor's appointments and birthing classes and late-night cravings. They painted the nursery together, arguing good-naturedly about colors and themes. They read parenting books and watched documentaries, and panicked together about whether they'd be good enough. "What if I mess this up?" Ivy asked one evening, her hands on her very pregnant belly. "What if I'm a terrible mother?" "Impossible." Nico knelt beside her chair, pressing his ear to her stomach. "You're already amazing. The way you talk to our daughter, the way you plan for her future, the way you protect her even now. You're going to be incredible." "Daughter?" Ivy's eyebrows rose. "We don't know the gender yet." "I know." Nico's smile was soft and certain. "A little girl with your eyes and your courage and your heart." But peace never lasted long in Nico's world. The threat emerged when Ivy was 7 months pregnant, not from Russo, who'd retreated entirely from Milan, but from an unexpected source. A journalist named Elena Marchetti began investigating Nico's business empire, digging into connections between his legitimate holdings and less savory operations. "She's being fed information," Paolo reported during an emergency meeting. "Someone's giving her access to records that should be sealed." "Who?" Nico's voice was dangerously calm. "We're working on it. But in the meantime, she's building a case that could bring significant legal scrutiny. If she publishes, she won't." Nico's certainty was absolute. Find her sources, cut them off, make whatever legal threats necessary. Ivy, listening from the doorway, felt unease creep up her spine. "Nico, we talked about this. About handling threats without, this is different." He turned to face her. "This threatens everything we've built. Our family, our future. I won't let some journalist destroy that." "So what's your plan? Intimidate her? Pay her off? If necessary." "No." Ivy walked into the room despite Paolo's visible discomfort. "We handle this the right way. Legally. Transparently. The right way could mean prison time. For me, possibly for associates. It could mean our daughter growing up visiting her father behind bars." The words landed like a physical blow. The argument that followed was brutal. Nico insisted that some situations required hard choices. Ivy countered that those choices had consequences that would haunt them. "I won't raise our child in a world built on threats and corruption," she said. "If your empire can't survive honest scrutiny, maybe it shouldn't exist. You say that now, but if I go to prison, if everything collapses, you'll be alone. Vulnerable. Raising our daughter without protection or resources. I've been alone before. I survived. This is different. Is it? Or are you just so used to controlling everything that you can't imagine another path?" They didn't speak for 3 days, the longest silence of their marriage. Nico threw himself into damage control, working around the clock to contain the journalist's investigation. Ivy focused on preparing for the baby, trying to ignore the sick feeling in her stomach that had nothing to do with pregnancy. Gabriella intervened on day 4, showing up at the penthouse with food and determination. "Enough," she announced, setting down containers of homemade pasta. "You two are being idiots." "Gabriella," Nico started. "Don't Gabriella me. You're both scared and acting like children instead of partners." She fixed them both with a stern look. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down, eat, and talk like adults. And you're not leaving this table until you've figured out a solution together." Ivy and Nico exchanged glances, both chagrined and slightly amused despite the tension. "Yes, ma'am," they said in unison. The conversation that followed was painful, but necessary. Nico admitted that his first instinct was always to protect and control, because that's how he'd survived for 40 years. Ivy acknowledged that her fear of corruption and compromise came from watching her own father destroy their family through unethical choices. "I can't be him," Nico said quietly. "I won't. But I also can't let everything I've built crumble without a fight." "Then fight smart." Ivy took his hand. "Work with Franco. Cooperate with the investigation if necessary. Show that you have nothing to hide, or that whatever you do have hidden, you're willing to expose and face consequences for. That's terrifying. I know, but it's also honest. And I think our daughter deserves to grow up knowing her father chose integrity over convenience." Nico studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay, we do it your way. Full cooperation, complete transparency. Whatever happens, we face it together." The investigation took 3 months. Franco worked closely with Elena Marchetti's team, providing documentation and answering questions. They discovered that the leaked information came from a former associate seeking revenge, someone Nico had fired years ago for ethical violations. The final article, when it published, was surprisingly fair. It acknowledged gray areas in Nico's business empire, but also highlighted his recent shift toward legitimate operations and transparent practices. It noted his cooperation with the investigation and willingness to face scrutiny. There were consequences. Some business relationships cooled, regulatory oversight increased, certain doors closed. But there was no prison time, no collapse, just a recalibration toward a cleaner, more sustainable future. "We survived," Ivy said, the night the article ran. "We did more than survive." Nico pulled her close, careful of her very pregnant belly. "We proved that we can handle anything together, that choosing integrity over convenience works. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us." Their daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in late spring. Ivy's water broke during breakfast, sending Nico into controlled panic. He drove her to the hospital with white knuckles and steady voice, holding her hand through contractions while maintaining the calm presence she needed. The labor lasted 14 hours, long enough for Nico to wonder if he'd survived the experience, watching Ivy in pain without being able to fix it. But when their daughter finally arrived, screaming and perfect and impossibly tiny, everything else ceased to matter. "She's beautiful," Nico whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Ivy, she's perfect." Ivy cradled their daughter against her chest, exhausted and euphoric, and completely overwhelmed. What should we name her? They'd discussed options for months, but never settled on anything definite. Nico studied his daughter's face. Dark curls, rosebud mouth, eyes that would probably be brown like Ivy's. "Grace," he said softly. "For the grace you showed me. The grace that changed everything." "Grace Ferrante." Ivy tested the name. "I love it." The days that followed blurred together in a haze of sleeplessness and wonder. Grace was demanding, hungry every 2 hours, resistant to sleep, possessing lungs that could wake the entire penthouse. But she was also perfect in ways Ivy couldn't articulate. Nico adapted to fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything, reading every book, consulting every expert, changing diapers and warming bottles with determined focus. "You're a natural," Ivy said one night, watching him soothe Grace back to sleep. "I'm terrified I'll break her." "You won't. Look at her. She knows you're safe." And it was true. Grace settled in Nico's arms like she belonged there, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. 6 weeks after Grace's birth, Ivy woke to find Nico's side of the bed empty. She found him in the nursery, holding their sleeping daughter against his chest, tears on his cheeks. "Nico, what's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything's perfect." He looked up, his expression raw with emotion. "I was just thinking about how close I came to never having this. If you hadn't walked into that club, if I hadn't pursued you, if we'd given up during any of the hard moments, I would have missed this. All of this." Ivy crossed the room and wrapped her arms around both of them. "But we didn't give up. We chose each other. Again and again. And I'll keep choosing you, every day for the rest of my life." The months that followed brought new challenges and deeper joys. Grace grew and changed daily. First smile, first laugh, tiny fingers that grabbed everything. Ivy and Nico learned to navigate parenthood, together, sharing responsibilities, and midnight feedings, and small triumphs. Gabriella visited weekly, spoiling her great niece shamelessly, and offering wisdom born from decades of experience. The business continued. Nico had delegated significant responsibilities, but maintained oversight of key operations. He worked from home more often, unwilling to miss Grace's milestones. And slowly, the fear that had characterized their early relationship transformed into something deeper. Trust, partnership, the quiet certainty of forever. On their first anniversary, Nico arranged for Gabriella to watch Grace while he took Ivy back to Lake Como. They returned to the villa where they'd spent their wedding night, and Ivy felt the weight of everything that had happened in 1 year. "We've survived a lot," she said, as they sat on the same balcony, under the same stars. Russo's threats, my investigation, pregnancy complications, new parenthood. We've faced it all. And we're still here, still together, still choosing each other. Nico pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a bracelet, delicate gold set with a single diamond. 1 year down, he said, fastening it around her wrist. 40 more to go. At least 40, Ivy corrected. Maybe 60, if we're lucky. However long we get, it won't be enough. They made love that night with the tenderness of long practice and the passion of new discovery. Two people who'd built something real from impossible circumstances. The final threat came when Grace was 6 months old. A man appeared at the cafe where Ivy had returned to work part-time. Not threatening, just watching. Security noticed him immediately and ran his identity. His name was Marco Venturi, and he'd been one of Russo's closest associates before the empire collapsed. "He's looking for revenge," Paolo reported. "Blames you for Russo's downfall." Nico's expression went ice cold. "Location? We're tracking him, but Nico, he hasn't made any moves yet. This could be surveillance, not a threat." "I don't care. He goes near my family. He doesn't leave Milan breathing." "Nico, no." Ivy stood up, Grace balanced on her hip. "We're not doing this again. We're not returning to violence and threats. This is different. This is about Grace." "Exactly. It's about Grace, and I won't have her growing up in a world where her father solves problems by removing people." The argument was fierce but shorter than their previous conflicts. Both of them had learned, had grown, through their trials. Nico's instinct was still protection, but he'd developed the ability to pause, to consider alternatives. "What do you suggest?" he asked finally. "Talk to him. Find out what he actually wants. Maybe it's not revenge. Maybe it's just a job or money or a way forward. And if it is revenge, then we handle it legally. We document threats. We get restraining orders. We build a case. We don't become what we're fighting against." Nico studied his wife and daughter, the two people who'd completely transformed his understanding of what mattered. "Okay," he said quietly. "We do it your way. But security stays tight until we know his intentions." "Agreed." Marco Venturi turned out to be exactly what Ivy had hoped for. Not a threat, but a broken man looking for answers. Russo's collapse had destroyed his livelihood. He'd come to Milan hoping to understand what happened, maybe find closure. Nico met with him personally, in a public cafe, with lawyers present, everything documented. "I don't want trouble," Marco said. "I just want to understand why Russo fell so completely. What happened?" Nico explained honestly about the investigation and Russo's mistakes. He offered Marco contacts for legitimate work opportunities. He even provided a severance payment, though he owed nothing. Marco left Milan 2 days later, threat neutralized through compassion rather than force. "You see?" Ivy said that evening. "Not every problem requires threats or violence." "You were right." Nico pulled her close. "You're usually right about these things." "Usually? I think you mean always." He laughed, the deep, genuine sound that had become more common over the past year. "Always," he agreed. "You're always right." "Happy?" "Deliriously." She kissed him. "And proud. Of you. Of us. Of the life we're building." Grace chose that moment to wake from her nap, her cries echoing through the penthouse. They went to her together, as they did everything now. Partners in every sense, building a life defined not by the darkness they'd navigated, but by the light they'd chosen. 5 years later, Ivy stood in the garden of their new home, a villa outside Milan, with space for Grace to run and play, far from the intensity of the city. Grace was 5 now, bright and curious, and absolutely fearless. She raced through the garden with Gabriella's old dog, laughing with pure joy. A second child, boy they'd named Alessandro, reclaiming that name from its previous associations, napped inside, watched over by Nico, who'd fully stepped back from active business management to focus on family. Ivy's cafe had become a small chain, 4 locations now, employing dozens of people, providing good jobs and community spaces. She managed them remotely, building something she was proud of. Nico had transitioned his empire entirely to legitimate operations, real estate, restaurants, import and on-export businesses that thrived through honest work. The transition hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. They'd faced challenges, sleepless nights with 2 children, business difficulties, the normal struggles of marriage and parenting. But they'd faced them together, with the honesty and communication they'd learned through harder trials. That evening, after the children were in bed, Ivy and Nico sat on their terrace overlooking Milan's distant lights. "Do you ever regret it?" Ivy asked. "Choosing this life over the power you had?" "Never." Nico's answer was immediate and certain. "What I had before wasn't power, it was control. And control is lonely. This." He gestured to their home, where their children slept peacefully. "This is power. The power to shape lives through love. The power to build something that lasts beyond business empires. The power of choosing connection over isolation." Ivy leaned against him, content. "I love you." "I love you too. Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For challenging me. For refusing to let me settle for less than I was capable of becoming. For giving me a family I didn't know I needed. For everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge over Milan, a city that had brought them together and tested them and ultimately witnessed their transformation. Two people who shouldn't have worked, who defied every logical expectation, who'd built something beautiful from impossible circumstances. Love hadn't conquered every obstacle. It had taught them to face obstacles together. Love hadn't erased their differences. It had shown them how differences could strengthen rather than divide. Love hadn't made life easy. It had made life worth every difficulty. And that, they both understood, was more than enough. This story reminds us that real love isn't about perfection. It's about two people choosing to communicate honestly, respect each other's choices, and grow together through the hard stuff. Age, background, none of that matters as much as how you treat each other when things get tough. If this hit home for you, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment with your thoughts. I read them all. Thanks for watching. See you next time.